ladies and gentlemen, coming to the program. First time on the AM WakeUp, not the first time on a show with either of us, I believe. But documentary filmmaker, writer, inventor, entrepreneur, space traveler, Derrick Broze is with us. I think if we can get him. Yeah, how's it going, man? How you doing?
Hey, what's going on, guys? How y'all doing?
Doing well. It's good to see you.
What's up, buddy?
What's going on, guys? My morning started off like shit, but I hope it gets better with this.
Oh, bummer.
What happened, Derrick?
I lost a pet this morning.
Man.
I just finished digging a hole and doing all that fun stuff. But here I am.
I'm very sorry
to hear about that, man.
Yeah.
You had an amazing interview yesterday with Dell. I was able to catch a little bit of it. That was awesome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for checking
to see that live. That was fun. I got there right at the time when you were asking him a question about donations and about where they come from. And I think it was a great question as well. And I kind of appreciated his answer because I think a lot of people do kind of bring that into question. Like at the end of the day, we're a value for value show. We get funded completely by the people. So we don't have to ever worry about what to say, what we want to say, how we have to say it. Nobody tells us what to say. There have been those questions when it's come to Dell. It's like, all right, you got a really nice set. It seems you got a lot of Scott-O. Where's it coming from? Are they allowing you to say what you want? Or are they kind of influencing you? How did you feel from the answer that he gave you that was kind of like, we have small donors. We do a Bernie Sanders style. And we don't sell the products like you see on TV, them selling these products like Pfizer products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so talking to Dell both during the interview and then afterwards, I'd say that he seems like a genuine person. I mean, I think I'm a pretty good judge of character. Obviously, we can all be fooled by, people, but he seems like a genuine person. I think he was being upfront. And as he mentioned in the interview, he said nobody's asked him about that before. So I was happy to be the first one. Because, when I do these interviews, especially with somebody who's more well-known, I don't want to just throw softballs. I want to like, hey, what can I, and also I think it's important for us to challenge our own community, people within the community and like, not just blindly follow each other and maybe be like, hey, well, what's this about? So yeah, the Informed Consent Action Network over the last couple of years, I don't think currently, but I know since 2017, they had received like millions of dollars from the Cells Foundation, the SELZ, Cells Foundation, husband and wife. And they're involved in some different their own foundation is invested in like Gilead Therapeutics and some companies that don't necessarily directly make vaccines but are tied to pharmaceuticals. So there's some suspicion, conspiracy, however you want to think about it, belief that Dell's role is to convince people that there are safe vaccines, and that really offends some people. Like me personally, like I'm not, if people want to take vaccines, that's their choice. But some people are like, oh God, how dare he, not say that all vaccines are the worst thing ever. Like he's saying there's safer vaccines, and that's, to some people that's a psyop itself. So they think Dell's like playing a limited hangout type of role. I didn't really get that feeling from him. I mean, if you listen to the answer, he didn't like shy away or he didn't shut me down and say, hey, like I don't want to talk about that. He said his answer. I think that there's maybe more worth digging into, but I also feel like if you look at Dell's show and his content, and you judge it by the fruit, that I don't see him shilling pharmaceutical products. I don't see him, shilling the products of the people who have donated in the past. Now, if we were like, hey, look, so-and-so donated to him and they're also invested in Viagra and Dell's promoting Viagra, then, maybe we could ask some questions. But at the moment, I felt, satisfied with his answer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I haven't talked to Dell a lot, but the couple of times that I have and the couple of times that we've had a chance to speak, he's always come across as at least sincere, very comfortable in the skin that he's in, and like very much more used to just a higher class or quality of life in general. I don't begrudge anybody necessarily for that. I know there's a lot of people that have significant issues with Dell for a couple of different reasons, the Brandy Vaughn death being one of them. Sure. But I'm not really sure there's no like direct link between Dell shutting down information about Brandy and information about Brandy being able to get out.
Sure.
And so I think that because he's one of the bigger guys, it's just easier to kind of want to point a finger or take a swing at, you know what I mean?
Of course. Yeah, that's one thing I will say, since you guys brought it up, is that, I mean, even since I posted the interview, I mean, my Facebook page is just littered with people telling me he's a shill and this and that. And they usually kind of, I can see it's like the copy and paste, like, here's the 3 links that prove Dell's a shill. And I see the same people sharing it about. So, I give everybody a time of day, right? So I'm like, okay, let me see what this is about. And I, go through it, and it's like a 10-page PDF, like dissecting Dell's family tree and trying to say maybe his grandparents aren't who they say they are. Just different things that, to me, it's like, okay, there's nothing even really strong there. It's like, okay, that he has Native American in his family, as do I. And anybody who comes from Native family knows it's very hard to have perfect records of your family history and this and that. But some people are looking at it, they're like, look, well, this claim is wrong in this area, or maybe this thing doesn't line up, or who's his real father? And it's like, what does this have to do with what Dell's doing now? And then the rest of it is just like, again, the claims of like, well, who's funding him? That's why I asked that question. I thought that was the most legitimate of the concerns out there. Mm-hmm. And then the other stuff was just like, well, he says there's safe vaccines. How dare he? Or he won't talk about terrain theory. Obviously he's a shill. And it was just these kind of like, they're not talking about my favorite pet topic, so they must be controlled. Yeah. And then, like you said, Steve, like, I think once you get to a certain level, you're just an easy target. Like, I think that I experienced that anybody who's had some growth in their channel, you kind of experience, you get to the next little plateau, and then all of a sudden you're a shill. You're big enough where people think they can call you controlled opposition, right? Mm-hmm. And I think at the level he's doing, where he has a nonprofit that employs, technical people to run the show. They have a set. They have all the, the typical kind of things you would want. And they do have an extensive team. But just full disclosure, I might end up being one of his journalists. This is one of the things we've talked about, because I want to take my work as high as I potentially can. Now, of course, if I saw something nefarious, then I probably would say, hey, Del, you know what? Thank you, but no, thank you. But yeah, I mean, I get the idea that it's easy, especially on the internet, because everybody lives on the internet. They rarely live in the real world where you pick up phones and talk to people and call and email and actually ask, a person's opinion, like I did for the story we're going to cover today. Instead, it's easier just to put conspiracy videos together and say, look at this person here, and they hung out with this person, and oh, look, they appeared on this podcast with this other it's just, I really am just so sick of the actual conspiracy theorists in the movement. Not like, the way we get labeled, but the real, true conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, the you did that guy's podcast once people are the craziest people to me. I mean,
why didn't you push back on that? Well, I did. He just gave his answer and I accepted and we moved on. Well, you can't stop there. You got to go deeper. It's like, dude,
Yeah, it gets old, but I was glad to do the interview, and I was glad also, and hopefully people who haven't checked it out will go check it out, that Dell didn't shy away from the question about the funding, and he didn't shy away from the question about terrain or germ. In fact, that was like he gave like a probably 10-minute answer to both of them, like really explaining his viewpoints. It wasn't like, no, we get funding, let's move on to the next question, or I don't want to talk about this topic. So, he seemed genuine to me. He seemed open to have a dialogue.
Yeah. Well, the answer that I like most about that particular question is he like I kind of equated it to the Bernie Sanders answer. Like, he's got more small donors than he does big boys paying him. So that says a lot in this business over here. I think when you have a bunch of small donors giving you money. So yeah, Steve, let's get into this. What do you want to?
Oh, well, here we go.
But yeah, there's a lot of different ways, and I've heard you talk about this now a couple of times, Derrick, and one of the things that I think is it's brought up usually, but it doesn't get like fleshed out too much, is the fact that it's basically just you that's decided to cover this. It's basically just T-Lab that's, put out the series through that outlet. We did like 2 stories when the original story broke a couple of months ago, but we're a daily show. We get caught up in, everything else and have got away from it 100%. Where do you think the lack of curiosity for this story is? Like, what do you think is driving the now let's just not touch it?
Well, for one, like you said, there's shows like yours, which I totally appreciate, and Ryan's that do like the daily wrap up. Here's stories that we think are important every day, and shit, there's never a shortage of content, obviously, for those kinds of shows. So I just feel like one of it's just like a basic thing. There's so much happening, right? Like I get that. Like, you've got mainstream stories you want to talk about, then you've got maybe some kind of outside the main, and then you can conspiracy, theorize about the whole thing, and then you got some really kind of niche topics. So there's a lot of ground that people are focused on. For me, I have tried to push myself further and further into the journalistic role the last couple of years. That's a title that I don't really take lightly. I think it does get thrown around a little bit too much, too easily, perhaps really in some of our circles. But I also am not trying to say like, hey, you need to wear the mainstream hat to be a journalist, because I also accept that I'll never be accepted in that world precisely for covering some of these topics. So, I think that when we're dealing with a topic like ritualistic child abuse, which is what the sheriff's office called it, that's not Derrick Broze's words, that's what the Utah sheriffs called it. That's a topic that I think scares some people away. And then also, I want to just give full credit and blame towards the QAnon movement for destroying, credibility in this area as well, because people hear things like this, and so often their first response is like, oh, that sounds like some QAnon thing, right? Like that's, you must think there's tunnels under the White House or whatever sort of things that they've read on MSNBC or Fox News that told them, hey, people talking about pedophiles are crazy. People talking about ritual abuse, this is, QAnon, don't pay attention. It has done a massive amount of damage over the years, because, I was covering Epstein back in 2017, put my documentary out in 2018, started covering the finders. I've been covering these types of stories, not because I particularly enjoy them, but because I do find them to be important. And even before QAnon, it was hard to talk to people about this, and then of course, before Epstein went mainstream, people were like, yeah, there's no way that would ever. Yeah, right. He's friends with the Clintons, I'm sure. People didn't want to pay attention. So you sort of had this awakening happening. And this is just my theory, awakening happening post Epstein. And then of course the QAnon stuff just like swarmed around it. And I think it really destroyed a lot of the credibility on topic. So yeah, I think there is some fear from some people to report it. Also, it's a massive topic. Like, it's not something you can really even just dip your toes in and understand. It's hard to just maybe do one episode, and then, like you said, it kind of like it goes to the background. So it's also why when I get into these topics, I tend to get fully pulled in. You just got to dive in, because there's so much there. And then the other thing is it's stomach churning, man. Nobody wants to read 151-page documents about people sharing their stories of being brutally raped, or just. And these are allegations in many cases, right? But even then, even just for me, I take the time to read the victim statements, because my other pet peeve that I'll probably mention again throughout this conversation is that so much of the independent alternative media only cares, and this is probably a better answer to the question, only cares about the salacious topics. Like, oh, was Kevin Spacey involved? Was Bill Clinton involved? Was Donald Trump involved? What famous people were involved? Oh, if it doesn't have names I know, then who cares? Okay, that's just run-of-the-mill abuse. That doesn't matter to me. Only if it has celebrities do I pay attention to it. So it's like, for some people, I think even going near the topic, it can be, oh, we're going to lose an audience if we dare go that way, or I don't really understand it, or, it's just, it makes me feel sick reading it, to, well, that's not important. Who cares about those people? Those people are dead. I don't know their names, whatever. So I think there's a lot of reasons that push people away. I do want to give credit to you guys for covering it. I want to give Ryan credit for paying me to have the opportunity to investigate this, because that's just the frank truth, right? Is like, and I said this in one of my interviews with Ryan, like, I've been doing independent media now for 12 years, and like, from the bottom of the barrel, you're getting paid $20 an article for 600 words, but you're happy to do it because holy shit, you get to write about what you love, to starting to get up to a level that I can actually afford to eat. And the truth of the matter is that these kinds of investigations, not just about ritual abuse, but just long form investigation, like, hey, dedicate your time to one thing for a month or 2 months or 3 months. Most people don't have the funding for that. The New York Times has the funding for that, the Washington Post, but they're not going to fund these kind of projects. So I do want to give full credit to Ryan for, when I told him, like, hey, dude, I got this source. They told me there's a tape. I think we need to get this. Ryan was all on board. And the more it progressed, and as I told him, like, hey, I think there's definitely going to be a story here. It's probably going to be 2 or 3, but I'm not going to be working on anything else. I'm just going to be like in this 100%. So excuse me for not pumping out a weekly article. And Ryan's cool. He understood the importance, and we're still getting more information, as I'll share today. And so I want to give credit to him, you guys, also Nathan Stoltman over at Lift the Veil. He's the only other person that I've seen cover this. And then Jason Burmis was the original person that covered it in early June, where I first heard. Jason did it, which I'm thankful he did. He did like just a short summary, but it was enough for me to be like, hey, I think there's more to this. And that kind of began my whole last 3 months.
So Jason Burmis has infected both of our lives. I got a question about the QAnon thing. Do you have anything, Steve? Because I just want to ask a really quick question about like the whole reason why. Because I mean, obviously, I've been around a lot of QAnon people. I've seen QAnon people, spoke to them. I still have people who still trust the plan. They're the hope porn, as Steve would call it. They're still holding on to it, thinking that there's hope. I know they can be kind of like frustrating at time, and they can muddy the waters, especially when you're trying to break like actual information that's has the receipts to it, However, don't you think that there's a lot of blame going on the fact that this stuff is never talked about, it's never come to fruition, they never bring it out in light, that these QAnoners just want to believe in some type of accountability whatsoever? I mean, at the end of the day, the QAnoners, what they want accountability from the overlords who have used children as currency, and now it's kind of obvious since the Epstein story has broken open.
Yeah, I mean, I get totally, and 100% I'm with them. Like accountability, shit, man. I wish we had accountability. I'm all for it, and I'm hoping and praying and doing my reporting and trying to push and push us in that direction. So I get that, but yeah, the hope porn is strong, and it's addicting, like the porn can be. It's addicting for some people, and they want to believe. So right, where was it? 2 years ago, there was tunnels in New York City that Trump was secretly helping kids escape from. Just the countless. It's like after a point, like you gotta be willing to say, like, look, I have this desire. I want good things to come. I want accountability. I want to save the children. Like, who doesn't want to save the children, right? It plays on your heartstrings, all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, I've been knee deep in this stuff. I've cried several times reading these documents. Like, it's rough. I get it. Like. But also, I guess I'm just like, man, I'm becoming more and more adamant or grumpy old man about this in the last year or so, that our movement, and I say that broadly because I know there's a lot of intersecting movements going on, needs to do better. Like, people just share shit that they didn't even do a simple CIA Google search to see if it was true or not. They can't, pick up, like I said, look up, like, is that location real? Is that person real? Do they actually work that job? Have they been to this place? I know these things take time, but it just feels like because of people's desire for accountability and for justice, that they are continually played the fool. I mean, we saw hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people strung along for 2 years, trusting the plan, and some of them maybe even still believing in this. That this was all about to happen, the mass arrest, the tribunals and stuff. And, to me, the scarier part is some of the QAnon stuff also pushed people towards supporting authoritarianism, at least in my view, because they were so desperate for this accountability that whenever Q is telling them Trump is going to round up people, who cares about, due process? They're going to round them up and hold military tribunals. People are like, fuck yeah, do it. Yeah, please take them away. Take away Hillary. Take away, they didn't care. It's like all their talk of law and order and all that was out the window so long as what they believed was going to be justice, was going to come to fruition. And I think that's really scary.
Yeah. If for people who have Guantanamo Bay on their bingo card, you can mark that off. That's what he was talking about over there, please.
I mean, if you look at QAnon as a psychological operation, which is something that we did from like day one, it was super effective in that over the course of 6 years, it deactivated the segment of the right that would have been completely up in arms, literally, and in the streets over lockdowns, over businesses being shuttered, over mandates, all of those things. But because there was a plan and because there was a white hat in office, it was okay. And over the course of that 6 years, it really delegitimized any accurate reporting on the child rape trafficking network that exists internationally. On, I mean, you hear more and more about it, but it's so easily dismissed as, oh, that's QAnon. And so in terms of it being an operation, it was damn near flawless.
If it wasn't, they sure got lucky.
I mean, we had on Anonymous Bites Back a couple of years ago, we had a couple of people that were, just anon hackers that had been approached by a number of people involved in the QAnon thing who were like, hey, come work for us on this project. And that's how it was pitched to them. Like QAnon was a project that they got to go work on.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. But, I just want to, I do try to give things a positive spin. So if there's a positive spin to that, it is encouragement to my brothers and sisters out there who desperately want to believe and hope and want positive things to come. For one, to recognize that you are the hope, like you got it. We just got to take care of it ourselves. I don't know what the future holds, but I know it's not going to be found in waiting for politicians or white hats to save the day. And then the other reality is that, look, if you desperately do care about these kinds of topics, I'm not just saying follow my work and share my work, although I appreciate that, but there are myself and others who do take on these topics of child sexual abuse, and then even getting into some of the more controversial stuff about claims of satanic abuse and stuff like that, and who do so from a real objective standpoint. I'm thankful and appreciative that people who've reached out to me have. I did an interview yesterday, and my work on this case was described as being measured, which I appreciate because, I don't like to just make wild speculation about things I can't prove. I think it's become so important because people are already willing to dismiss us in the alternative independent media because I'm not in the news set wearing a suit on CNN. So who am I, right? So I have to work extra harder to keep my credibility. And where the mainstream feels like they can just say things and say according to this anonymous source, I don't have that luxury. I can't just expect people to trust me just because I say so, and I don't want people to trust me just because I say so. So I do come with the receipts, and if I'm going to make a claim, if there's an article, an essay, a book, a documentary with my name on it, I stand by it.
Sure.
Getting into what you've been uncovering over the last several weeks, and in particular, I think the stuff around. So what struck me about this is that it really kind of. It just sucks because most of the principals are no longer living, right? And a decent number of the people who had already come forward to either sign an affidavit or be a witness on or off record, no longer with us. But in terms of like what happened and who Gordon Hinckley was and what this whole mess really centers around, maybe just walk us through a little bit of that.
Yeah. So I'll give just a little bit of brief background for those who haven't followed along. As I mentioned earlier, there was this investigation that started my whole report the last 3 months. It came from the Utah County Sheriff's Office. And May 31st, they announced that they were investigating ritualized child sex abuse involving 3 different counties in Utah with state, local, and federal agencies involved. It was literally just like 2 or 3 sentences, and then that was it. And it was like, okay, what the heck is that about? And that set off like a whole chain of events that led to a 5-part article series I did for The Last American Vagabond, looking into these claims, looking into this investigation. And as I started to do that, I kind of widened my reports, and I said, okay, well, let's look at the history of these claims in Utah, because there was quite an abundant amount in Utah specifically. And then my final report, which I did in July, was about the Mormon Church and history of these claims within the LDS, the Mormon Church. And again, there's quite a few claims and not just claims, but actual incidents of child abuse, sexual abuse, and even just as recent as a week or 2 ago, the Associated Press just put out a new investigation showing that child abuse was covered up for at least 7 years by the Mormon Church through this helpline they have. So, I've been kind of investigating those matters, and the moment I decided I was going to focus on the Mormon Church, which I want to make it clear again, and I have to say this with every interview because there will be a comment about it if I don't, that this article series and this investigation wasn't and is not an attack on the church itself, although I am increasingly open to the idea that there's something really wrong within the church, that it's not just a few bad apples. But my investigation didn't start out to like prove the Mormon Church is evil or to go after anybody specific. It was just like, let me look into this, because I was totally clueless. I feel like I've got a real education the last 3 months on Utah and Mormonism, because to put it in the context, like think about the founding of the United States, and Utah, like a lot of the Western United States, was really Wild West, kind of unsettled. And you had a lot of the Mormon followers who were the first settlers of Utah and established themselves. And so Mormons, especially back in the day with polygamy, had huge, massive families, multiple wives. And so you see a lot of the same names that were involved in the founding of the church, like Joseph Smith, Hamblin, Levitt, etc. These family names that you find all over Utah. Some of those names pop up in the case that I've been investigating as well. And there are different, familial connections there. But my point in saying that is, I didn't quite realize how much Utah is ran by the Mormons, and how not just Mormons, although obviously that's part of it, but these families, these intergenerational families that have come there, founded, and are in politics and are in police and the law enforcement in all kinds of areas. And that continues up to today. And then I also didn't know that the Mormon Church is actually the #1 landholder in the United States for a religious organization. A lot of attention's been paid to Bill Gates, but this church is massive. It is incredibly powerful, and it's only happened really in the time that we're talking about in my story. That's why I think it's also relevant, even though, as you said, some of the people are dead and past. This is 30 years ago. But when these videos came out that was sent, these people were trying to expose the church in the late 80s, early 90s, right as it was starting to explode. If you look at church membership from the early 90s to 2000s to where we are now, it has become one of the biggest denominations. But 20, 30 years ago, the Mormon Church was still pretty much seen like a cult or some weird kind of thing. And so they've completely changed their image the last 30 years. And a lot of that was under the guidance of former Mormon President Gordon B. Hinckley, who died in 2008. And so yeah, I've been investigating. I've been learning a lot about the church. And in that process, people started to send me information. Hey, I was in the church. This is what I remember. This is what I experienced. And people sending me their stories of abuse or being at weird parties or hearing about this thing or this thing. And some of these threads are things I can't really follow up with. It's like I can kind of add it to my knowledge base, but I can't really write an article off somebody's story from 30 years ago. But then I was contacted by a source that said, hey, I have a VHS tape called The True Story of Gordon B. Hinckley. I haven't looked at it in 30 years. It was produced in the late 80s, early 90s. It might be of interest to you. Would you like to see it? And so I started just researching on this tape before I accepted it. And I couldn't find anything. And as you guys know, it's very rare to not find even an article or something about a topic. Like, it feels like everything is on the internet. At least we have that illusion sometimes. But this is one of the cases where there was literally one ex-Mormon blog. There's a forum called xmormons.org, which is a forum for ex-Mormons. And there was one reference to, there used to be this video called The True Story, this and that. And that was it. It was like an urban legend, a kind of a myth that some older Mormons heard about. But for the most part, it never made it out of Mormon country, and it barely even became known there. So that immediately I was like, okay, so nobody knows about this tape. It's not on the internet. I couldn't find it on BitChute or any other place you search for videos. So I decided, let's receive this tape. And since I'm in Mexico, we got it sent to Ryan and we got it digitized. We made multiple copies just because we didn't know what we were dealing with. And, typically when you start digging into old things, if there's anybody keeping tabs on it, you start to raise alarm bells when you're picking up the phone saying, hey, have you heard of this tape? Or, hey, I saw you on this tape. Can I talk to you about what it means? Or where did this tape come from? And so I can go further. If there's any questions, I'll pause right
Well,
here.
I want to know where you got the VHS machine to play the tape. That's what I want.
Well, this is like another thing, and I don't know how you guys feel about this. It just is what it is for me. But I had so many synchronicities, for lack of a better term, during investigating this, and this was one of them. So I got a VHS coming my way, and I'm telling Ryan, I'm like, well, I'm not going to be back in the U.S. till the fall, so I can't take this tape. And if you try to send it to Mexico, it might never get here. Well, and I said to Ryan, I was like, could you just receive this and hold on to it till I can come back and take a look at it? And he's like, oh, my assistant has a company where they digitize VHSs and DVDs. So I was like, okay,
nice.
well, I guess we're supposed to get this tape then. So Ryan got the tape, and then within 24 hours, digitized and sent me the copy, and I started doing my digging.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, and so I mean, from that point on, I let the source know the tape has been received, and actually there's another tape that we haven't released yet as well. And what they sent me was The True Story about Gordon B. Hinckley, which is a 30-minute documentary which was produced independently in the late 80s, and as I said, circulated in the early 90s, I think around 1992, 93. And they apparently made probably 3,000 to 4,000 copies of the VHS tape, is what I was told. And basically started going to different churches and saying, hey, would you be willing to show this? We want to share this truth about the Mormon church. And they were trying to get Mormons to listen. They were trying to get Christians to listen. And pretty much anybody who would pay attention, they held like a local screening. Obviously, this is before the internet, so it didn't really make it to wide circulation. And what I've since come to find out is that Gordon B. Hinckley's attorneys, they were aware of this. They set up a meeting. They tried to collect all the copies of the tape. Once they realized it was, out of their hands, it was, too many to stop. They tried to offer money to the man who was the investigator. His name was Bill Claudin. He's since deceased. I'm trying to find his children to talk to them. He had several sworn affidavits, and apparently even more than the people who are on the tape, of people saying that they witnessed Gordon B. Hinckley, who at the time was an apostle in the church and was on his way to becoming president. And it's important to know that in the Mormon church, these aren't just titles. Like, you know, they're literally seen as a prophet. Like, that's, you become an apostle, a prophet. There's several different titles that they give you. So these people are seen about as close to God as you can get, right? Obviously, they're not Jesus, but they're definitely not just your average human. They are elevated to a certain status. And so clearly people would want to protect that reputation and that image. But what's on the tape is that these people swore that they saw Gordon B. Hinckley, along with another man who was a bishop in the church, who owned a car lot, hosting these sex parties above, at an apartment above the car lot, and then another house in Salt Lake City. And that at these parties, you know, there was like homosexual relationships, there was prostitutes, and then the worst part of it all, there was reports of young boys being there. Now, I do want to say, at the time this is being reported, I think it was maybe a more conservative time. So even just the idea of like, you know, a gay relationship is like, but more specifically, it's because this was a married man in the church pretending that he has some high values and morals and is a man of God. And then he's being accused of going out and having sex with other people outside his relationships. You know, that's the main point. But then obviously there are 5 different witnesses that we know of so far, and there might be more, who say that they witnessed young boys, teenage boys, 15 and 16-year-olds, maybe younger, going into these parties. And there's more. I mean, there's, besides what I have on the tape, I don't mind sharing with you guys because I can make it clear in this context that, like, hey, I can't prove this at the moment, but some of the other sources I spoke to and some of the other people who were around at the time said that there were incidents of some of these young boys being found dead. There was, you know, one source told me that at the time that they found a young boy, you know, they said his name was Billy. Obviously, it's very hard to verify something like this 30 years later, but a young boy that was found deceased under a local bridge in the Salt Lake City area that got sort of just written off as like, you know, a homeless kid or some sort of murder, something, you know, it was never fully explained, but this source believed that it was one of the boys that was, you know, involved in the parties and was disposed of, if you will, and gotten rid of. So, you know, there's definitely more than I've been able to flesh out. But so I got this tape and it hasn't been seen in 30 years. I start, as soon as I receive it, I watch the whole thing and I just start taking notes. You know, I start taking notes of every single name that's in there, every, you know, place, any reference I could get, and just started digging, trying to contact every person. So this is what I mean, like when I say journalism, not to say that us commenting on the news isn't a type of journalism, but I do have an issue with people who like to spout off things in the mouth when they haven't done a second of research. So I went through, you know, obituary records and, you know, work records, employees. I did everything we could to try to track down these people. And so far we've found every single one of them, except for one person who I'm hoping, if he's alive, that we're going to be able to find him. But yeah, with the large majority of them, they have all passed away now, including one of the strongest witnesses who I was really hoping to get a hold of just died in the last 6, 7, 8 months. And his wife just died last week. So, I mean, this is like people are kind of checking out right now. And it's really, it's a little unnerving because in addition to the tape footage, I want to make this clear, in addition to the tape footage, which is just a documentary somebody made that has 5 people claiming they saw this, right? It's not the strongest evidence on its own. There's affidavits, but we don't have copies of that. We have reports that the church was trying to shut this down, that Bill Claudin, the investigator, was challenging the church to take him to court because he said, you know, I'm ready to bring in my witnesses. I'm ready to bring in these sworn affidavits. Please take me to court so we can really get this thing figured out. And I think the church basically tried to smother it and then hope everybody forgot about it. And then Gordon B. Hinckley became president and it just sort of disappeared. But in addition to the tape, I was also sent testimony of a man named Derrick Broze. And Derrick Broze is also deceased. He died in 2017. But in 2014, and the last years of his life, he recorded a sworn testimony, which we have copies of and I've released clips from, where he basically says he was friends with Bill Claudin, that he accompanied Bill Claudin on these investigations, that he met the witnesses, he heard the same testimonies that we're hearing in the tape, that he was there whenever Gordon B. Hinckley's attorneys tried to come shut it down. He said he had 3,000 of the tapes in his bathtub at one point. You know, he's just providing corroborating evidence. Now, again, unfortunately, he died, but the last thing he did was record this testimony, and he asked that it not be released until after he died. So whoever had possession of it, you know, it's taken 5 years for it to kind of come to the public. And, you know, there's some people even my own sources who've been critical of that, like, why did this guy wait to corroborate the story till he's dead? Because if he had said this 5 years ago, and if maybe we were paying attention, many of these witnesses would have still been alive. But, you know, I'm not here to judge people for how they approach these situations. The point is, this man chose to record his testimony and say, look, this is what I know to be true. This is what I saw. This is what I witnessed. And that was also sent to me. And so my first part of my investigation, we include the original tape about Gordon B. Hinckley so people can read it on their own. I summarize it and I quote from it. And then we also include Daryl Clegg's testimony and what he said. And so to me, I feel like starting with that, which is just the first part of the investigation, it kind of opens a whole nother door that I can explain in a moment. I feel like we have pretty strong evidence that at the very least, these claims existed against Gordon B. Hinckley, that there was attempts to cover them up, and that they've never been properly given their day in court or their day in public opinion or anything. You know, and it was just sort of like, shut those people up, quiet it down. And like I said, the one or two references you can find on the internet are on ex-Mormon blogs that try to attack the characters of the people and basically just say it's all, you know, it's tabloid nonsense.
Okay. I have some questions.
Go ahead.
All right. So this was, let me put us over here. So a lot of this started when we saw the sheriff, right, say that we're going to go after this. This is what kind of set Mr. Broze off. He saw that. How did the police department and this sheriff come to this conclusion of going back? What are they looking at? Obviously, you went there, you investigated, you found something. Have you gotten this into the sheriff's hands who's doing this investigation, or are they doing an investigation just to shut the door to make sure that case is closed? What are your thoughts on that?
So two things. Let me make this clear because I know it can be confusing. So the initial incident that I talked about back in June, which was the impetus for my investigation. So that was Utah County Sheriff's Office investigation into ritualized child sexual abuse. And that investigation is still ongoing. My first 5 articles, which you can find on Last American Vagabond, focus on that, but then started dipping into some of the history. And as I said, that's when I got sent the tape. So the tape is not necessarily directly related to the sheriff's investigation, although to answer your question, yes, I have sent it to them. And I've also, I want to make this clear too, before we published our articles, we contacted the Mormon Church to ask for a comment. And I reached out to everybody who's involved that was still alive, their families, and gave them a chance to comment too. So again, we're doing our due diligence. But related to that investigation, the sheriff's investigation into ritual sexual abuse, that is still ongoing. They haven't specifically said if it has to do with the Mormon Church. They haven't named any suspects. They haven't named anything. But that situation is still ongoing and is even crazy on its own because you have the county attorney, David Levitt, again, a family name from the Mormon Church, who inserted himself into that investigation by saying, hey, I'm named in these documents and me and my wife, we're not cannibals, we're not murderers, I promise. Like literally came out and gave a press conference and said that. And so we've since learned that he is actually under investigation for trafficking a child due to an adoption scheme. I mean, there's just a lot of moving parts here. There's like the sheriff's investigation. We don't know specifically what it's about. I've asked them. They said that to them, the term ritualized means abuse that can take in a ceremonial setting or a setting where there's prayers. So they haven't said it's satanic rituals. It could be Mormon rituals for all we know. I mean, we don't know 100% what those rituals are about, right? So you have that kind of component going on. And then my investigation into this tape with Gordon B. Hinckley is kind of separate from that. Although, I don't know, if it does connect in some way, I hope that they will use that information. So does that make it a little more clear? Like my investigation, I'm still investigating and still following the sheriff's investigation. But once I got sent this tape, this kind of set me off on like a sort of secondary investigation related to the overall abuse topic.
Has the sheriff kind of named the Mormon Church though at all? Is that what he's contemplating?
I don't know. They haven't said. Yeah, so even when David Levitt, the county attorney, came out and said, "Hey guys, I'm not a part of this. This is a politically motivated investigation." The sheriff's like, "We don't know why he's saying that. We didn't name him. We're not going to name anybody." And I've tried to, press them, and I know other media have as well. They basically, and I think they're taking the right approach. While the county attorney and other people are trying to let's play this out in the media and make it a political thing, the sheriff has kind of remained kind of tight-lipped and said, this is an ongoing investigation. They did say that there's federal agencies involved, that there's state agencies involved, and that's pretty much all they've said. Now I'm hoping, honestly, because, to one degree you might hear, okay, the feds are getting involved. It's really going somewhere. Or as you hinted at earlier, it's getting covered up. And that's what I worry about is because They said that they started their original investigation in April 2021. They announced it in May 2022. And 3 months have passed. There's been no indictments, no subpoenas, nothing publicly done.
Yeah.
So, I'm hoping that it doesn't just disappear and then it becomes part of the conspiracy lore where 10 years from now, people are like, hey, you remember that time the sheriff said they were investigating ritual abuse? Yeah, nothing came of it. I really hope it's not one of those incidents.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of like any kind of, closure or recompense for any of the victims, is there any sort of sense that something like that could happen? Or is this just more about being able to finally put some proof behind decades of allegations?
You mean for my investigation?
Well, I mean, just in general, like, do you think that there's any sort of because in context, it would be because you're the one doing the investigation, because let's be honest, fucking nobody else is, But
I think that there's a couple of roadblocks. I mean, you got statute of limitations. Just in the last couple of years, the Utah Supreme Court, they issued a ruling that basically shut down all kinds of sexual abuse cases. And there's some theories about why that might have happened. Again, somebody looking out for somebody else. But there has been such a history of abuse within the Mormon church in Utah. I mean, guys, like, again, this is not, you don't have to attack the Mormon church. It's just a history. Look up a man named George P. Lee, who was a church leader. And then, later on admits to raping several young girls, 6 years and 5 years old. That's not the part of the history the church wants you to know about, but those things happen more often than not. And, I think that, so there's clearly something going on here, but you have statutes of limitations now. The Utah Supreme Court has made it very difficult to go back and try cases that happened, I think, before 2000, I want to say. And obviously this abuse is still going on, but for whatever reason, there was a lot of reports of this stuff in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I don't mean just satanic panic, people making things up, like legitimate concerns that now they're like, sorry, the courts can't do anything about it. And in the case of the tape, in my situation, it is absolutely like, so the tapes were made in the 80s. The tapes involve allegations of abuse that took place in 1964 and 1965. So think about that. That's almost 60 years ago. You're definitely not getting any legal, help with that. They're not going to put anybody in jail for that. But there are some other ways that people can get justice. And for one, I do think sharing the stories is one of them, but also some of the victims have been able to come forward in some cases and get people excommunicated from the church, which is, I think, a big thing to do, because at the least take this person out of the church where they're going to have access to other kids. And also for somebody who lives and breathes a church life, whatever church, that's going to hurt them. That's going to bother, that's going to hit them where it hurts. And then some people will try to go the civil lawsuit way and try to file civil lawsuit to at least say, like, look, I need some accountability. And I'd like to, if you guys are cool with it, jump to the second story, because it actually deals with that. And it is an example of how there can still be accountability.
Can I ask one question though? I mean, because I know you're talking about accountability, guys, and I'm just saying to myself, like, nobody's going to be brought to justice. Is your hope that you systemically smash the dirt and the evilness of these entities out there? I mean, you did just mention something that, like, this is going to really hit hard for the church going person inside. It's going to really hurt them. But is that the only form of justice that you really think will come? Is that we can show the systemic filth of this group?
I mean, I think in some cases, depending on how old the abuse is, that might be the only thing you can do, is try to weaken somebody's church. Like, if they're involved in the church, you can go after them in a civil lawsuit, maybe try to get money out of them, as we saw with some of the Epstein victims. But, my real personal motivation, and this is perfect for the next story, is really, I mean, and maybe it sounds cheesy, but is truly to try to honor the victims. Because, I mean, I know you guys have seen it. Like, there's what I was hinting at earlier is, like, I can do a video on Epstein, and if I put Epstein, Trump, and Clinton in the title, it's going to get 10,000 views, just because people want to read about or hear about that, like, oh, who is involved in what. But the response to, for example, Justice Delayed, this investigation, because it doesn't have a sexy name that anybody knows about, and maybe people are like, oh, who cares about the Mormons? It honestly hasn't made a huge splash. I'm thankful to everybody who has shared it and who's interviewed me and talked about it. I wish for a bigger impact, and I knew that going into it. Like, I'm not upset about it, but it is what it is. So for me, my motivation is just like, okay, look, Who cares about the numbers? Who cares about the views? Who cares if this gets anybody's attention? I'm trying to honor the victims. And in the next part of the story, I actually was able to talk to some of the victims who are still living. This is one of the situations where we actually do have living victims. And I was able to talk to them and let them know, hey, for whatever it's worth, I'm doing a 3-part investigation into this. I'm independent media. I'm not, New York Times, but I'm doing what I can. And I just want you to know that I heard your story and I'm sharing your story. And, maybe that's all there really is for some of these cases. And then there is maybe another type of accountability I'll share with you guys in just a second. So the second,
both, by the way, I really like that fact is because everybody knows Epstein's name. They don't know the victims' names.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's really is.
I appreciate that, man. Really. And so look, when I started investigating this tape, we had the whole report, everything I just described, like who are the people in the tape, Daryl Clegg's story, and I put together a nice report. That's part 1 of our investigation. And literally 2 or 3 days before we were about to publish, Ryan and I were just going every detail. We can't get any of this wrong. We need to make sure we got this right. We're going to make sure we contact the church. I also sent out a press release to every single media outlet in Salt Lake City and surrounding counties. Not a single one of them responded or has said anything about it, of course. But I decided to watch the tape one more time and really watch it meticulously. Like, I need to see, is there any details I missed? And sure enough, as I was listening to the testimony of one of the witnesses, a man named Louis Sims, who's the one that just died in January, he worked at the car lot, the Hunter Motor Company car lot, where this all supposedly took place. And the owner of that car lot were 2 brothers, Alvin and Walton Hunter, who were also members of the Mormon Church and who were also buddies with Gordon B. Hinckley while he was, alleged to be doing these sex parties. Well, while I was listening to Louis Sims' testimony, he said, well, actually, I think Gordon B. Hinckley was the one who gave Walton Hunter his bishopship in the church. And that just immediately set off like an alarm bell. It's like, wait, this guy is in the church. He's a bishop. That means there's going to be a record of him somewhere out there. I should be able to find him. I might be able to find family. And so I start digging, and he's dead. He died in 1996. I look at the obituary. I find some family members. I just start doing my research. And sure enough, I found that his adult daughter wrote a book called Deliver Us from Evil about her pedophile father, Walton Hunter, bishop in the Mormon Church, raping her throughout her childhood and her sister. This book, you can find it on Amazon. It's called Deliver Us from Evil. And that's, again, another synchronicity. I was just like, whoa, oh my God. I mean, even more so, this woman was a mutual friend of a friend of mine back in Houston who happens to work on sexual abuse of children. So it was just like another sign, like, I need to find this woman. I need to talk to her. And that ended up, her story, her name is Deborah Hunter Marsh, and her sister, Rebecca Capp. Their story ended up becoming the basis for the second and third part. The second part was basically just kind of going through the book and telling her story. And again, I mean, reading their book, I read it over last weekend. It made me tear up and cry a couple times. I'm just going to be real. Like, it's not easy to read this stuff, even if you've read it 100 times, when you hear somebody talking about their childhood being ripped away from them and how it's clearly affected them throughout their adult life. Deborah Hunter Marsh is not doing well. She is an elderly woman living in an assisted care living home now. She's struggled with addiction. She's struggled with all kinds of things. Her sister, has struggled in her own ways from her abuse. And the book tells the story of how they realized that their father had been raping Deborah, specifically, raping her, his daughter, and then sexually abusing in other ways his other daughter, Rebecca. And their mother knew this was going on. They said there's no way the mom didn't see the blood on the bed or the bodily fluids on the bed. That one night, mom walked in while dad was forcing Rebecca to do something, and she called her a slut and ran out of the room and never said anything about it. And just, this disturbing behavior by both parents. And again, nobody knows who these people are. Nobody knows who Walton Hunter is. He's not a famous person in the church, and probably nobody really cares. But this woman struggled her whole life, and she waited till 2014 to kind of tell this story in her self-published book. And yeah, it's been 8 years. Nobody knows about the book. Nobody's really paid attention to it. But thankfully, I found it, and I was able to bring that together. So now it's not just 5 witnesses in a tape and a man from 2014 saying Gordon B. Hinckley and Walton Hunter were at these parties. I saw these things. Now it's one of the man's own daughters saying, yes, he was raping us. He was abusing us during these same time periods. And in fact, in her book, she even mentions the tape. She doesn't mention it by name, but she acknowledges that all the people who are listed on the tape, Charles Van Dam, Louis Sims, she met them. She knows them. So we have a record that they were real people. They worked at the car lot. She told me on the phone as well when we spoke, she remembers seeing Gordon B. Hinckley there all the time with her father, that they were definitely best friends. And she has since told me now in 2022 that she fully believes that Gordon B. Hinckley and probably other members of the church knew that her father was raping his daughters, that, he was involved in this stuff. And, she thinks there was a cover up. She also says that she thinks that Gordon B. Hinckley is guilty of what's on the tape and way more. And I also spoke to Rebecca Capp, the sister. And unfortunately, and this is one of the more messed up parts of the book, is that, once Deborah and Rebecca started to speak out as adult women and say, like, Mom, we know this happened. We know you guys covered this up. Deborah she started to see a therapist, to get some help with this. And the therapist was like, we need to set up a meeting between your parents. So he did mail them letters, and they had correspondence, and she included this in her letter. So you can see letters from her therapist saying, hey, we need you to come meet with your daughter. And the parents basically saying, you brainwashed our daughter. We're not coming to see you. This is all nonsense. So we have records of all that. We also have records that show, well, hold on, I was getting off point, that the grandpa also abused his grandson. After the daughters chose to speak up, they told the mom and the grandpa, the Walton Hunter, look, we'll still be a part of your family, but you can never be alone with our kids. You can never, ever be alone with our children again. And, that's the agreement. And so they brought the kids over. Rebecca brought the kids over to grandpa's and grandma's one day and told them, do not stay at the house alone. Do not be alone. And they are all going to go to the beach. And then sure enough, the youngest kid, who they call Alex in the book, his shoes are missing. Well, sorry, Alex, grandma says you got to stay at home. You can't go to the beach without your shoes. You got to stay here at the house, and grandpa will be here with you. And by time they get back, and by time Rebecca gets there, the kid's already displaying issues. Something happened to him while everybody was gone. And he keeps saying covering his mouth and saying my mouth hurts and saying, I don't want to be a grandpa. I don't want to be a grandpa. Just really messed up stuff, And then one of the other daughters in the same family, she says when she came back, when they all came back from the beach, she witnessed grandma pulling down Alex's shoes from the top of her closet. And when the young girl came in, grandma said, oh, I just found his shoes on the ground, even though she saw that. And she said in the book, it says the young girl goes to mom and said to Rebecca and says, Mom, why would grandma lie to me? I saw her take the shoes from down there. She didn't just find them. And so, they came to the conclusion that the mom helped create the situation where the child would be alone with the grandpa and get abused. And that young man, unfortunately, died of a drug overdose in the last year. He also struggled with mental illness and mental, struggles his whole life, probably, I would say, directly related to the abuse that he suffered. So, when people want to ask why this matters or who cares, that's why I care. Because, look, man, this is still affecting people in 2022. This woman is still alive, dealing with the repercussions of the abuse she had. When I talked to Rebecca Capp on the phone, she said the reason she hadn't spoken up before and the reason she didn't want to be directly involved with her sister's book is because her son was still alive and she didn't want him to suffer anymore. Well, now her son's died of an overdose that she said was directly related to all the shit he had to deal with, and she's willing to speak now. So she told me her story, and she said, I have no doubt my dad was involved in other stuff. She said he was evil. It wasn't just, raping us. It was like anything he could get his hands on, he would, get into. So she has no doubt that he was involved in the stuff that Gordon B. Hinckley and him are accused of, in addition to raping his own daughters.
Jeez. Christmas.
Yeah, but it's one of those situations where unless they're there, they can't, and so much of that you would probably block out anyway. That's just fucked up, man.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's not fun shit, man. But like I said, I was thankful it was a personal point of pride for me to be able to find them, because I couldn't find them. And we published the first two, and I was like, well, I guess, they might have passed away. Most everybody else is dead. And then, I ended up being able to find them and talk to them. And that's why I wrote a third part. The third part was written a couple days afterwards, once I got comment from, and that does include some of the information I just shared with you. So I encourage anybody who wants to get the full lowdown we have a page on the website, Justice Delayed, where you can, all three parts are in one single place to get, this information. And we've now uploaded that tape, The True Story of Gordon B. Hinckley, it's out there. It's on the internet. It's everywhere. So at the least now it's a part of the historical record. So far, the church has chosen to ignore it. They're not responding. I've sent them a second attempt to comment whenever I found out more information, saying, hey, Walton Hunter was a bishop in your church. His daughters say he raped him. And let me say this, I didn't mention this part, that later in life, once they realized they couldn't take him to court, and after young Alex was abused, he was basically just too traumatized. They tried to set him up with an attorney and said, can we get him to testify in court and get this guy to go to prison, since, they couldn't hold him accountable for raping his own daughters. And the kid was just too traumatized. He couldn't even, talk about it without flipping out and breaking down. So they're like, okay, well, what else can we do? So they filed a civil lawsuit against him. And in the article you can find those records. I'm actually should be getting the full records today from somebody who's going to San Diego courthouse to get them for me. But we have records that show that he was taken to court, civil court, by his daughters for raping them. And then also they did end up going to his church. So he was in Salt Lake City at the time of the Gordon B. Hinckley tape for 10 years. And then he picked up his whole family, and we don't know why, and it could be to run away from these claims, but he picked up his whole family and was out of the church for a couple of years. And then he got back in San Diego for another 10 years, and he made his way back to bishop again. And so he was bishop in San Diego whenever Rebecca and Deborah, as adults, went to his what's called the stake president and said, hey, this is what my dad did to us. And they actually were invited to participate in what they call a disciplinary council, where they had to go testify and share all these horrible stories in front of 12 men and their father directly, face him directly. And he was excommunicated from the church. And she has that letter in her book as well. So, we have documentation that these things did take place, and that Walton Hunter, despite his obituary, still talking about how great he was and how much he helped the church, not mentioning that he was excommunicated for raping his daughters. It did happen. We know that his daughters did come forward. They filed a civil lawsuit. They got him kicked out of the church. And we have the therapist letters as well corroborating this dialogue. Oh, shit, my camera's going to die soon.
Oh, yeah, it is, huh?
Yeah, I see the battery. Can you plug that in?
Oh, it's what it is. That's freaking... That's why Dad. He's been here about an hour. I don't know. I don't know how much time.
We're just getting started over here.
Like I do. I feel like
we're just getting warmed up. Wait.
No, you can easily do. Another
I'm down to come back at any time, guys. Like I appreciate y'all making the time to cover this story. Like I said, I know it has layers, and it's not maybe the hottest thing at the moment, but I appreciate it.
Well, it's one of these things that I have kids, dude. Like, this affects me personally. I have a huge stake in this anyway, but we've made a point not just to cover the Epstein stuff, but the Finders stuff and all of the more swept under the rug or forgotten about cases of this, because it is so systemic. It is so just completely prevalent, and nobody wants to talk about it. It's the biggest third rail in media, and it sucks because it's people who have zero opportunity to protect themselves, zero power, zero people in their corners. So I feel like it is necessary to do this.
And I think that, you asked earlier, Pasta, about why, or what's the kind of accountability. I didn't mention this, but I will say this, and take this however you want, everyone, that when Walton Hunter, the bishop who was raping his daughters, was dying, he told his wife in his final days that he was being surrounded by dark figures, and he was frightened. He was terrified in his last moments. And, take that however you will. Maybe that's another form of accountability on another level. But I think that these stories matter because the victims matter, even if they've already passed, even if there's a chance that somebody who knew about this reaches out to me and says, hey, I have another piece of the puzzle, and we get somewhere closer to the full truth, or we do get somewhere where we can actually hold someone accountable. My guess is that people who knew about this are still alive and still working in the Mormon church. I can't prove that at the moment, but I don't think these people were acting alone.
Well, the way you can tell, and the way that you can tell with Scientology, and the way that you can tell with the Catholic Church, and the way that you can tell with every institution of power where these problems exist, is because at no point does any of the leadership come forward and say enough is enough. We're going to have a period of reckoning where we go through and sort this shit out and decide what it is we even stand for. You know what I mean? And that's what it's going to have to take.
I think you're right, man. And I've got, for the most part, people have been open to the investigation. I've got a few Mormon responses.
I was going to ask about that.
Not the church, but just some people who follow me who happen to be Mormon, oh, this is National Enquirer or tabloid stuff. How dare you, or this and that. And it's like a gut reaction to try to defend, which I get. But like you were just saying, I feel like, look, if you love your church or your belief system or whatever, wouldn't you want there to be accountability so we can root out all this shit? If it's not just, if it's just a few bad apples and if it's not corrupt to the core, like some people, I definitely have interviewed ex-Mormons who believe the church is satanic. They believe the church is, that the rituals are very similar to Freemason rituals. And there's a lot of different beliefs from people who've left the church who don't support it anymore. But if you're in the church and you still believe and you believe in the gospel and all these things, and you think it's just a few bad apples, then why shouldn't we encourage the Associated Press investigation into the helpline? Why shouldn't we look into what Gordon B. Hinckley was up to? That's the only way there's ever going to be a cleansing that really needs to take place. And this isn't just the Mormon church. Of course, we all know the Catholic Church, Southern Baptist was a big investigation last year, Jehovah's Witnesses. To me, it's not just it's religions, but it's also positions of power, because we see this happen with school cops, with teachers, with politicians, with, sometimes obviously parents themselves. I think it's that position of authority that some people take advantage of. They simply go into those positions and they take advantage of, Boy Scout leaders, all those kind of positions. It's like a hierarchy, someone who's in a position above where the child's going to feel like afraid to speak out about it, or they trust the person. They think, okay, they're telling me I should do this thing. I guess that's what I should do, right? Oh, well, there I go.
There you go. We can hear you.
Yeah. Cool. But yeah, so, I think that's really the root of it for me, is that like looking at the authority in the situation. Like, I think there is a problem within the Mormon church, but I don't think we can just say, oh, it's specifically because of Mormon beliefs. This is clearly there's a pedophile problem. There is a pedophile problem in our society. And I don't, know how to quantify that per se, but we can look around and see it in Hollywood and see it in all the different areas I just named and the religions and elsewhere. And there's something there.
Yeah. Do you think that all this old investigation of all this stuff that happened 60 years ago might shake the grounds for something to pop open today, that we can get a hold of it maybe in real time, not 60 years later?
I hope so. And I do want to just, anybody out there who's hearing that, like, if you've got information, I don't even mean just to send to me, send to whoever you feel comfortable with. Like, please. I totally get the desire to be safe. Obviously Daryl Clegg, for example, he said on the video I have that he was still being followed, and he was afraid for his life. So I get, while, I can't sit here and blame somebody who's like, hey, I'm going to hold this till I'm gone. But at the same time, when I told that to Deborah Hunter, she was upset. She was like, why do people wait? Why do people wait? She's like, if they wouldn't wait, we would get this information out sooner. And so she was frustrated that somebody who knew something would kind of hold on to it. But I do hope that and this other situation with the Utah Sheriff's investigation, that's why I think that I'm holding out some hope that could break the dam, right? That because it's happening in real time. The Finders was back in the 80s. Epstein was in the 90s, and then more recently. But, we're talking about things that this is in the 80s, 60s, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But now we have an investigation taking place in the 2022s about ritualized child sex abuse in Utah. And there's at least one sheriff who's been willing to, take it seriously. Now, where it goes from there, I don't know. I guess we'll see. We
will see. Derrick Broze, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you guys
again soon, brother. We do appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you guys for all your work and for kicking ass every day, and for giving me a chance to share about this. It means a lot.
Come back again soon. We have a lot to talk about, and thank you for covering this story. When you said like it gets hard to read this stuff, we got a lot of followers on the Combo Couch because I was doing a lot of Epstein stories, and we were looking into it. It's hard to look at this stuff. I didn't sleep well for the first 3 months of doing this shit, like looking into this stuff, because I was looking at what the victims were saying, and I was like, holy cow, this is so hard. So thank you for doing what you're doing, Derrick. We do appreciate it.
You're welcome, man. I don't know if you guys could see it. Hopefully you couldn't see it that well under my eyes, but I haven't been sleeping well doing this. So I know the feeling, but thank you guys. Appreciate both of y'all.
That's how we know you're hard at work, brother. You have a good one.
You too.
Peace. Derrick Broze, everybody. And there's the article. Go check it out. Please go follow his work.